Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a few more seconds, about half a minute or a minute until everyone's joined in before we start our webinar today. Get your notebook, refresh your coffee, and we'll start in a minute. Go ahead and start today's webinar. Good morning and welcome everyone to our MEA webinar today. Our webinar topic is regulation changes and best practices for underground locates. An introduction about the new legal concept of dedicated locator as introduced in the amendments to the OUNISA 2012. Our presenter today is Adam Mordaunt. Adam is the director of the member services at Ontario One Call for the past 8 years. Adam has worked in and overseen the member and client services department. His latest projects is establishing and facilitating the dedicated locator department, coming from a career as a navigation and safety officer on some of the world's largest cruise ships, as well as working for British Royal Navy. Adam brings a diverse background of safety and damage prevention. We also have on our call Richard Neuhammer from the City of Toronto to chime in on any municipal perspective questions that may come up. Some housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded. You feel free to self-declare continuous development hours to your organization, whether it's a PAO or any other professional organization that you report to. We will post the recording on our website, Municipal Engineers Association. For questions, please use the Q&A feature at the top. You hover your mouse at the bottom or top of your screen, and we'll answer the questions at the end. And with that, I'll give it to you, Adam, to start your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me today. As the introduction suggested, we're going to be talking a little bit about dedicated locator, what it is, what we're seeing in an industry, some of the issues that we've seen, and what we're doing to overcome those issues. So just to start off, I'm going to tell you what the dedicated locator is. So in essence, a dedicated locator is a single locating resource that is used to mark all underground infrastructure within a project area. So this actually has an exclusion of transmission hydro and transmissions hydrocarbon lines, pipelines, but every other underground infrastructure would be encompassed into this dedicated locator project. So today, a request comes into Ontario One Call, and each owner of underground infrastructure would send their locator. Sometimes it might be a Locate Alliance Consortium locator, so 2 or 3 people might send the same locator, but then the other 2 or 3 members that are notified would send individual locators on site to complete their locates. Obviously, this has an impact in terms of the time frame in which they are completed. If there are any issues with the locates, they have to be followed up on an individual basis, whereas dedicated locator is something where you have the one resource going out and marking all of those types of infrastructure. So I'm going to be talking mostly in terms of the benefits and the viewpoint of the project owner, the excavation company in this situation, but I will talk about some benefits as well of a member or the owner of underground infrastructure. So a dedicated locator is really beneficial for a couple of different scenarios. We've got 3 here. long-term projects, large projects, and also projects with complex requirements. So in terms of long-term projects, we're talking about something that is several months or even years in duration. And with that, you're getting locates and relocates constantly throughout that period. And although the validity has been extended, the minimum validity to 60 days instead of the previous 30, we're not always getting the relocates fall at that day 55 mark or 60-day mark. Quite often, we do see that these fall out of alignment with each other when some locates are cleared or they're completed very early afterwards, after a locate's been submitted. Others might take an amount of time. So then that relocate cycle will be happening every 2 to 3 weeks. This means that there's a large number of locate requests that the excavator is having to put in to manage, and also waiting for those locates to be completed, hoping that they don't expire. And then also, this puts huge workload onto the owners of underground infrastructure, because again, they're having to relocate sooner than the expiry of their previous locate. So that bogs down the system as a whole and slows it down for everyone involved. Large projects, very similar. We're looking over a large area and you might need relocates or remarks throughout the project. And again, it puts pressure on both sides, whether you're the project owner or whether you're the owner of underground infrastructure. And taking into a dedicated locator, it means that you're not having to rely on someone else's resources to go out and complete that locate. The project owner is using their own resource, whether it be a third party or an internal locator. And then projects with complex requirements. This is a situation where you might be doing a large scale project and it's from A to B, but a lot of these projects aren't necessarily always progressing from the start through to the end in a linear fashion. You might be jumping around as the project needs require. And as such, you might be needing different locates at different times, or the locates that you're looking to use. Again, you might have to go and get relocates, and the management of that and keeping everything valid over a large or long-term project can be quite cumbersome on both parties. And one of the first things that many of the excavating companies do when they go into a project is actually go in and dig up those markings. Now, obviously, the best practice would be to go and get offsets and make sure that everything is there so that they understand where the infrastructure still is, or daylighting the infrastructure. But there are times when you remove the markings and you need to get remarks again. This obviously puts pressure on both parties. You don't want the project to stop, and the member also has a number of other locates that they need to complete. So the benefit here is you've got a dedicated locator. If you need them to come and do a remark, they would most likely be on site or be easily accessible, so they can come back at a moment's notice, depending on the agreement with your internal or external locating department. So dedicated locator can be very beneficial for a large number of projects, but these are just three of some of the key areas where dedicated locator is being utilized today. So talking about benefits, I mentioned a few just a second ago, but ultimately, one thing that the excavation community has been after for a number of years now is control over the locating side of things. And dedicated locator gives that to the project owner. It means that you can control when, where, and how the dedicated locator goes and completes those locates. Whereas with the public stream today, you're waiting for the member to be able to get their resources available, and they would come out and they would obviously mark as per your requirements, but sometimes that doesn't always go to plan. So having full control of the locator is beneficial, again, for both parties, so that as a project owner, you're getting the locates done when, where, and how you want. And as an owner of underground infrastructure, you're not having to send out your locator multiple times. This, in turn, can help keep your project on time, because now you're in control of when, where, and how the locates are completed. This is something that, again, is really beneficial to all parties. And it also gives greater flexibility. The example I gave a minute ago, the first thing a lot of excavation companies do is dig up the markings. Well, now you've got the flexibility to bring that locator back, Or in another situation where the excavation crew are on site and they're about to dig, but something doesn't quite make sense to them, they're able to ask that locator directly questions about the locates, and that locator is able to give the answers then and there. Again, keeping everything going. And ultimately, this gives us the opportunity to reduce or even remove equipment and crews downtime and the costs associated with that. With many projects ranging between $10,000 and $100,000 a day in equipment and crew downtime, being able to get control of the locates is very, very important. So I just want to show you what we're seeing in the industry today in terms of locate requests coming in. You can see the dark green line, that's last year's numbers, and we started it in May. This is when our Bill 93 received royal assent and became part of our Act. And this is where the new legal concept of dedicated locator came from. Prior to Bill 93, there was a version of dedicated locator, but it was all very manual and no one was compelled to take part in the agreement. So there was a lot of these setups where some members would be a part of it, others wouldn't. The timelines didn't necessarily match up. With the new legal concept, we've seen that clarified a little bit. And certainly a number of the telecoms industries are the ones that really are taking advantage of this today. We saw one telecoms company prior with their legacy version of dedicated locator in a particular city in the GTA. They had 9 drills and 9 crews were ready to put in the fiber to the home. However, because of the lack of complete locate packages, so they might be waiting for 1 or 2 owners of underground infrastructure to complete the locates, they only had 1 drill and crew active. The other 8 were just on standby. When we brought in the new legal concept and we've transitioned all of their areas over now, they've now got 8 of those drills and crews up and running. Still not the full 9, but trying to get all of the locating resources has been a little bit of a challenge for some, especially with fiber, which is such a rapid process. But we can see that the numbers started to increase, and there was a little bit of a dip towards the end of 2022. This isn't unexpected. We see that seasonal dip. Obviously, most of the excavation activity happens when the ground isn't frozen over. But one thing to note is that dip is actually a lot shallower than the public stream requests that we saw. So in fact, we're seeing more of the dedicated locator projects continuing year round than we are for standard requests through our system. And then you can see in January, we took more dedicated locator requests than any month of last year. Bearing in mind, this is obviously not a peak month for our excavation activities, but what we did see is a lot of the project owners, excavation companies, they're looking to start up for this peak season. So we saw an influx in January. Obviously, February is a shorter month, and a number of all the requests had already gone in January, so it dipped down a bit. But we expect this to continue rising each month throughout this year. And just to put it in a bit of perspective, at the moment, the locates that we are seeing come in through dedicated locator, we're seeing approximately 13.5% are dedicated locator, to obviously the rest of that is through the public stream. But that's something that there is a lot more desire than people actually partaking in dedicated locator at this time. So how does dedicated locator work? If a project owner wants to take part in dedicated locator, and there's some mandated broadband projects, but anyone that wants to be take part of dedicated locator can do. The only areas that have to be considered are the costs involved. Now the project owner is taking on the costs of the locator, but in return, they are getting that full control. And in general, when you equate the amount of downtime of the equipment and crew and put that against the benefit of having that full control and keeping your projects on time, the actual costs usually either level out or with dedicated locator can be of a benefit to the project owner. So they need to select a dedicated locating service provider. Now, they also, this DLSP needs to make sure that they have fulfilled the basic requirements as per the non-lack framework. Now, this is a framework that is in the final stages of approval, and it's just with our ministry currently, but this should be released any time now. And it does have just basic requirements, and it talks about things like, insurance and things like that. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But the idea of this is there has to be a certain level of locator out there. We don't just want someone without any experience or any training or insurance to go out there and locate a member's underground infrastructure. So this basic level of requirements is an entry point. And then the owners of underground infrastructure may have more specific requirements that are just specific to themselves. They may have a certain mapping system, or they may have enclosed space training that's needed for their locators. And the other part that I will just add to this, it's called the non-lack framework, because any lack locator, Locate Alliance Consortium locating company, already has these agreements and processes in place with the owners of high-risk infrastructure. So they've already got that higher level of expectation and deliverables. So once you've established who the DLSP is, the DLSP will set up an agreement with the owners of underground infrastructure within that project area. This agreement might include, you need to do certain enclosed space training. For example, high pressure water main fault training. Some municipalities will give the training and allow access to the locator. Other municipalities will actually require that it will be one of their internal staff that would give access. But then you would put in the requirements for, we would need 48 hours notice to grant you access to this enclosed space area. There might be other requirements, such as I say, providing information for logins for mapping software, trainings that may be required for mapping software, or anything like that. And also escalation trainings. Owners of underground infrastructure are compelled by law to provide mapping of where their underground infrastructure is. And we know that not everyone has 100% accurate mapping. We're obviously moving forward and improving mapping day by day, but there needs to be an escalation path. So if the locator believes that they need to ask questions or they need to validate some information, they need to have a path to be able to do that with the owner of underground infrastructure. All of this, as well as any other agreements between the owner of underground infrastructure and the DLSP, would be contained within this agreement. Once that's been completed, the DLSP would obtain the mapping and any standards, again, training or access to mapping systems or anything like that. They would gain all of that from the members. And eventually, once the project's ready to start, the DLSP would go out, they'd complete all of the locates for the underground infrastructure in the area, and therefore, thereafter, work as per the requirements of the project owner. So challenges. We have had a number of challenges. It hasn't all been smooth sailing, and certainly it was a concept that was used throughout the industry in terms of the legacy dedicated locator, but bringing in this new legal concept and the legal requirements and how it would be implemented in the industry has been quite tricky for all of the stakeholders, whether that be the project owners, the DLSPs, or the owners of underground infrastructure. And we've had some challenges like locating resources. We know that last year a lot of people said there aren't enough locators in the industry to complete the public load. And there was a concern that by taking some of these locators and putting them into dedicated locator, we may actually be making things worse. But ultimately, that's not always the case. We have a large number of locators in this industry. They're just not all being used to locate infrastructure. We know that some of the locators in the past that weren't necessarily paid great wages would go onto construction sites, see construction crews working and getting paid quite a bit more, and they would transition over to these other roles. Now, they're still trained locators and they still have a wealth of knowledge behind them, but they're now working for these excavation companies. But these excavation companies can have in-house locators, and they can utilize these resources that aren't currently in the locating industry. We're also seeing that by removing the locates from the public stream, so the area where someone just calls in a standard request with Ontario One Call, and the owner of underground infrastructure must complete the locate within 5 business days. If we remove it from that pot and we put it into the dedicated locator pot, it removes a huge amount of pressure from the public stream locates. It means that we ultimately don't need to necessarily have that many more locating resources. It means that the more complex locates, the ones with the relocates over and over again, those are being removed. And we've got the smaller projects, the projects that are usually 1, maybe 2 locates that are left, removing a huge amount of the workload and transitioning it to dedicated locator, where you can more efficiently utilize locating resources, because these locators are no longer traveling and spending hours in the car in a day, going from one locate area to another locate area to another locate area, perhaps being interrupted and having to go and do an emergency halfway through a locate and then having to go back again, wasting an awful lot of time in the car. We're now removing that aspect, and a dedicated locator can be on site on a particular project and, depending on the size, be working all day doing all of the locates and be used more efficiently. So the locating resources has been problematic, but we are starting to see progression and a better use of the resources that we have out there. Project owner involvement is also something that we've, as an internal, my team and I have been trying to tackle. A lot of project owners are saying, yep, we'll pay for it, not a problem, but we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to manage it. And the DLSP is then perhaps trying to manage these projects, but they don't have all of the knowledge on when and where the digging is going to occur. So the project owner does need to dedicate resources on their end to manage these projects. Obviously, you're managing the excavation project anyway. This is just another component to that. But again, the benefits that come with that are pretty huge. And then finally, member mapping. This is something that I've been communicating myself for a number of years now, whether it be at symposiums for the ORCGA or geographic councils or at the CCGA level. We're trying to get our members to improve their mapping. I remember going back to when I first joined Ontario One Call a little under 9 years ago as a member services specialist. One of my first tasks was to get a couple of the last remaining municipalities on board just after the legislation had passed. One of the members that I went and spoke to told us they just didn't have mapping of their infrastructure. And he actually ended up going and getting a tourist map and a highlighter pen, and he circled each location where the infrastructure was. He knew where it was, they just didn't have mapping. And that's not the only example of this that we saw back then. We are certainly in a much better position today, but we still don't necessarily have 100% coverage of what is underground. And we need to move towards that and keep improving upon the accuracy of the digital mapping that we have. And one thing that I do encourage the owners of underground infrastructure is that every time a locate is completed on your infrastructure, you're validating that information that you have in your system. And the moment most owners of underground infrastructure take that locate information and they just discard it. It would be very expensive if you sent someone out to validate all of your infrastructure, but you've got someone doing that on a daily basis. Let's utilize that information and continue to improve the mapping that we have on your end and on our end. So I mentioned earlier about the non-lack framework. So some of the requirements that we put as the basic requirements on the technical side, damage tracking software. So this would be something like ISNet World, or there are a couple of different companies that offer these repositories of information, and it talks about damages or workplace injuries, a number of different reporting requirements. And most larger members today do require this tracking in a certain piece of software. So that's one of them, but this would be something that would have to be communicated and start a communication with the owner of the underground infrastructure to really understand their requirements on that front. ticket management software, mapping systems. Obviously, you need to be able to take the tickets. You need to be able to respond to the tickets. And you need to be able to receive and understand and view mapping and any other attachments that might go with it, whether that be as-built or previous locates. You, as a locator, the locating company needs to be able to facilitate all of this information. There's also business requirements. At the moment, we've got insurance under there. Obviously, I'd say it's only insurance, but insurance is a really important aspect of this. And it's talking about liability insurance mostly. Obviously, there is going to be liability taken on by the DLSP. And as such, they need to have insurance in case anything goes wrong. And it goes into a little bit of detail in the framework. The locator requirements, training, quality assurance. Obviously, we need those locators trained to a certain standard. They need to be able to be trained on all types of infrastructure. They need to have that history to show that they've also been able to locate this infrastructure appropriately. And also quality assurance, there needs to be audits completed at the beginning, at least, of this process where they're marking another member's infrastructure. So these will be obviously fine-tuned between the DLSP and the owner of that infrastructure in terms of how many QAs or audits of the locates are completed and how that's reported. But it does need to happen. This is generally new infrastructure to a number of the locators. So the training and the auditing step is a very important part of this. And usually what we're looking to build here is several months worth of this information. But once the locator and the locating company have proven that they're able to continue in a safe manner, then some of these requirements will be relaxed in terms of how many audits are required. That will then be put onto only new locators. But again, these are things that are requirements of the members. None of these are requirements of Ontario OneCall. We're not in the process of approving who can and cannot be a dedicated locator. That comes down to the member themselves. A locator partnership. So we introduced this idea where non-LAC locators can partner with a LAC locator who already have the training and the auditing processes in place and the access to the mapping and any other standards that they need. So they can build this partnership in the short term whilst they're building other processes to become that non-LAC DLSP in the long term. So we built those partnerships up with the LAC locators currently. And again, this is something that we continue to work on because it is quite a load for the LAC locators to take on as well. But we did build that partnership and we're trying to build at least one route that involves LAC and one route that does not involve LAC. And that includes with training. There's obviously LAC locators that can give their training or the ORCGA that can give training. And then we need to have a register of approved non-LAC LSPs. This is something that we are currently working on at Ontario OneCall to understand, is it Ontario OneCall that should be hosting this information, or is this someone else? Where is it located? Who manages this information? What's included in this information? So we're trying to understand what the industry needs for all of this, and then we're going to bring this into play. But at the moment, what we are seeing is certainly mostly LAC locators and some that have already in the past worked under a LAC locator in a similar way to the locator partnership. Those are the locators that are becoming DLSPs today. We see a number of other companies that are trying to become DLSPs. There is obviously an investment side of it. There's the time to get everything up and running, all the processes, the trainings, the people internally. A lot of these smaller locators, they don't have auditors or quality assurance personnel. So they're having to go through and see how that fits within their system. And then from there, we're seeing them come back to us and showing how they're improving. And we're working with the owners of high-risk infrastructure to try and help them progress and then become dedicated locators. So we're seeing this unfold, and we're definitely making a lot of progress. But I will also say that a lot of people out there are seeing that the progress is slow. But what we've got to keep in mind is all of this is an important step forward, and there are a lot of people that want to take control of locates and therefore use Dedicated Locator. But we've got to make sure that we do it with safety in mind. If we were just to jump into this with 2 feet and let anyone go out and locate infrastructure, we're not doing our due diligence and we're not keeping safety at the forefront. And we're potentially setting the whole industry up for failure. So our progress has been forward moving, but at an appropriate pace. And we are obviously also eager to get this up and running for anyone that wants to take part of Dedicated Locator. But certainly we are trying to do it in the most appropriate way. And Ontario One Call has a dedicated locator team. So I oversee the dedicated locator team, and then Marco is my supervisor, and he oversees Alex, Brendan, and Christine, who are our coordinators. And this team have tried to make themselves available as much as possible and will do so for anyone on this call or anyone that you know of that would be interested in this. We will set up one-on-one meetings, attend association meetings, board meetings. We will set up, say, a whole morning if you want to build a workshop, if there's a number of people involved. Anything that can help you move forward, myself and my team are definitely here to help with that. And certainly you can reach out to myself. My email is up on the screen there now, or you can reach out directly to the Dedicated Locator team. If you want to start progressing with this, they are definitely the best people to reach out to, dl@ontariooncall.ca, or you can find further information on Dedicated Locator on our website, ontariooncall.ca/DL. There's a wealth of information there, but there's also a lot to understand and unravel on this. And I understand sometimes it can be quite confusing. It is a holistical change from the construction industry that we knew of yesteryear. The members aren't paying for the locators, but the project owners are now getting full control. That in itself is something that takes a few people a little bit to understand. But certainly Dedicated Locator can be a huge benefit for the whole industry. And we are certainly hearing a lot of anecdotal information right now, and we're asking our owners of underground infrastructure to track this information, but we're certainly hearing anecdotal information to suggest that Dedicated Locator is a safer practice because the locators aren't pressurized to complete locates in a timely fashion. The locators are on site so the crews can ask questions. The locators are freely available to come back and do remarks, which means that the construction crews don't feel pressurized to continue with digging if they feel that they could do better with remarks. There's a number of reasons that we are getting told that the owners of underground infrastructure believe that this is a safer method, and certainly we hope to be able to back that with data in the near future, but certainly we need to be able to understand this a lot more before we can really commit to that. But it is, as I say, on an anecdotal level, it is coming back to us as a safer way to go. And with that, I'll hand it back, and if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Adam, for this presentation, and exciting to hear this that this initiative is working so far and resolving the locator locates issues that we've experienced during COVID and these years. I don't see any questions in. I would like to remind everyone, if you would like to ask your question verbally, please just use the raise your hand function, and we'll be able to bring you up and have you verbalize your question. Otherwise, please type in your questions. Like Adam said, if you're interested in learning more or seeing how you can coordinate a workshop for your team, you can type that in as well, so that we can provide your information to Adam. Looks like you've done a good job clarifying all the details, Adam, since there's no questions so far.
Well, perhaps what I'll just give a little bit more information and
Absolutely.
give a little bit of more time if anyone thinks of a question. So I mentioned earlier that we're seeing a lot of activity with telecoms. This is definitely an area. The telecoms is such a competitive industry today, trying to obviously get into an area first and get into that. But although a lot of the activity is coming from the telecom sector, we are seeing interest from across the board. Municipalities are definitely having a look at this, especially right now, in terms of it doesn't need to be a dedicated locator for the one type of work necessarily. It can be something that you can have multiple projects throughout the municipality and have that flexibility. One of the ones that we hear quite frequently is actually regarding tree planting. It's a very difficult project to maneuver around, and quite often they require a single locate for each and every tree, because otherwise when they get on site and maybe something's wrong, the tree's already there and it's starting to die and they're not able to put it in the ground. So they get an individual locate request for every single tree. That's really quite burdensome, again, on the members and on the excavator side. So Dedicated Locator can help out with that for 6 weeks, but then go off and do some of the other capital works projects during the other times. And another example that I used to live in a small town down in County Brant, and one of the things that they used to invest quite a lot in is tourism and the tourism signs. And there was one particular tourism sign that got knocked down by a car. And it took 6 weeks to replace this tourism sign, and everyone was up in arms. And small town, small things make big issues. So this sign didn't get done for 6 weeks because of the lack of locates. But what it actually ended up meaning was that a lot of people were very upset. If you've got dedicated locator, you've got someone that can, the flexibility, go in, do locates there, and you can have that sign replaced on the day and not miss the key 6 weeks of the year in terms of tourism. And certainly keeping all of these projects on time. I think a lot of people would agree, and I've heard this comment time and time again, the value that people would put on keeping projects on time on your public image is huge. You can't really put a value on that. And Dedicated Locator gives the greatest opportunity to have that public image, keeping projects on time and on track, gives the greatest opportunity from the locates side of thing, at least.
Thanks, Adam. There's one question that came up for more clarification. Do you foresee the dedicated locators as being part of larger companies or as being standalone services, or a combination of both?
I see it being a combination of both. I know that the larger companies today are in the best position to take advantage of this. They have much more robust structures. Many of them already have big contracts with locating companies, whether it's internal or external. So they're ready to get going with this. And I know that a number of the municipalities are ready to get going with this because they, again, have locating staff on the payroll, but they're just not necessarily locating anymore. They're doing other functions. So I see, again, more municipalities coming into the fold with that. But long term, really, there's not many areas that wouldn't benefit from dedicated locator. It's just where the line of the cost to perform the function crosses the benefit of the timely locates. But I do believe that at some point we will cross that 50% threshold in terms of how many of the requests coming into Ontario One Call will be dedicated locator. I do think that will be the case at some point. And once we cross that 50% threshold, remember, we've taken all of the big and complex and burdensome locates out of the public stream. So this gives the members the greatest opportunity of being compliant with that 5 business day turnaround. And therefore, the smaller entities, the ones that don't necessarily have the resources available to pay for and staff up for dedicated locator, are still actually going to get their locates in a more timely fashion. And dedicated locator can definitely help everyone, and especially the members, get towards that compliance of 5 business day turnaround. So it is something that I can see being a benefit for everyone. But it's, there is going to be a threshold for sure in terms of cost.
And I think you're on mute.
All right. I see another question asking for a follow-up meeting or a call with Adam
Absolutely.
regarding some more information on this and construction projects. Greg, I would like to comment a little bit more. Richard is just joining us for this session. He might not be able to join any future meetings that regarding answering questions on the dedicated locators. Myself as well. I have a question for you, Adam, perhaps, and since we have a bit more time, do you know of what training should municipalities consider, or what training opportunities or certificates that they should consider if they're if they want to have an in-house located dedicated locator for themselves, or is there an organization that they need to maintain a certain designation or a certain level of continuous development? Any of these information would help if a municipality or an agency is considering having something in-house.
Absolutely. The first area that I would start is you've got two routes. You can either speak to the owners of high-risk infrastructure in your area and see what their requirements are or their suggested routes. I know a number of them are saying we've already established an agreement with the LAC locators to provision a certain amount of time for training. So that is something that's already in place. Another area that I think would be a very good step forward, and this certainly is, again, it has involved the owners of high-risk infrastructure, is the new ORCGA training, the new DPT training. So this isn't coming until later this year. We had hoped that it would be available for this dig season, but certainly the new version of of the DPT training that the ORCGA is bringing forward is of a much higher level than DPT 100 and 200. And that would be certainly a really great entry point. There is always going to be member-specific training that will need to also happen on top of that. And certainly what a lot of the members are trying to look for is competency. At this time, we don't have competency certification or anything like that, or there's no certified route to become a locator. This is something that Ontario One Call's talking about, our ministry, a number of the other ministries within the government. We are discussing this route forward, but it isn't a simple or a quick thing to put into place. But certainly at some point, we would like to see this as a certified career, and therefore those steps will become a bit more clear about how to go about that. But certainly today, I would suggest talking to the ORCGA about perhaps even their DPT 100, 200 training today, and then upgrading that to the new training later on in this year. Or if you're looking to get up and running sooner, then having that communication with the owners of high-risk infrastructure to say, this is what we would like to do, whether it's the ORCGA route or through another route with that owner of high-risk infrastructure. Please put us in contact and let's get the ball rolling.
Oh, I don't see any further questions, but thank you, Adam, so much for your presentation and for taking the time to answer our questions in detail. And thank you, Richard, for joining today's webinar as well. And also thanks to all the attendees for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us at the webinar today. It is recorded. It will be posted on our website in the next few days.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amin.
Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks. Bye now.